I didn't imagine that there's so much evidence of a worldwide cataclysmic recent flood. We just have to keep on going because the evidence is so overwhelming. How can you conclude otherwise? Lots of little local floods. The consistency of the pattern of a worldwide flood with all the legends and myths of cultures over the years, over 500 of them. And what we have on the other side is no scientific evidence that it couldn't have been a worldwide cataclysmic recent flood. I read a number of the over 100 points that can be observed from the Bible as well as just walking around the planet Earth to support a worldwide cataclysmic flood. Let's go to that again. K14 rather, K14.htm. And we're going to look for the statement here. While there can be no credibility linking an isolated myth, legend, or tradition to a literal historical event, in the case of the flood, where such accounts are found in over 500 different sources completely around the earth, the evidence then becomes overwhelming. The biblical record is the accurate and uncontaminated record of the flood because it is the only one that can entirely be substantiated and supported by scientific evidence. These authors here, Dr. Henry Morris and others, have compiled evidence which shows that a global flood did occur, including Professor Clark, University of Illinois, and Dr. Henry Voss. They formulated a model which shows the global sedimentary contact formed by the effect of the moon on the stars during the flood. This academic impact is that there is evidence of a global flood, and there is a global association in the laminated layers of sedimentary rock. The intercontinental linking evidence is that before the continents were separated from the one big landmass, there was a great flood. Raised beaches and terraces, even on mountaintops, and great beds of fossils are found which show that the life forms tend to gravitate together in a time of cataclysmic events. And these fossil beds, literally millions and sometimes even billions of life forms, are preserved in rapidly hardening, liquefying stone. Limestone is calcium carbonate, which is of the same chemical composition as concrete, and it must harden rapidly or it does not harden at all. So the evidence is that there was a flood, and that it is more than a localized flood, and that it was a flood of global proportions. What caused the flood? Well, tentative facts fits the facts of under consideration. To begin with, we recap the conditions before the flood, where there was a canopy of thin, compressed hydrogen encompassed by layers of water above the earth. The atmospheric pressure was greater, as was the oxygen content, in order to support the huge forms of life which then existed. Radio waves bearing music from the stars were received by the crystals in the sand and amplified into musical vibrations. The radio waves from the stars would have also have affected the water table. It has been found by scientific research that a crystal, such as silicon sand, does a very special thing in the presence of water when attenuated by radio signals. It begins to vibrate, and adjacent water begins to pump, sometimes on a molecular level, through the layers of the silica sand, thus cleansing the water of molecular impurities. This resonating water did something else as well. In the presence of a crystal, which is being energized by long radio wave signals, water begins to pump, resulting in the rising of the water table as though being orchestrated by the stars. Therefore, at the morning hour before the flood, there must have been a continuous and gentle flow of water from the subsurface upward, resulting in gentle flowing resonant streams feeding into larger streams. Such a water system would have also resulted in a mist rising up and dampening all the ground with moisture. The mist would have absorbed from the air the abundant oxygen, making all the water sources laden with this essential life-giving element for all marine life. When oxygen is depleted from the water, marine life suffers. But before the flood, oxygen in the water was so abundant that all forms of life which lived in the water grew to enormous size. We again note that the environment and ecology before the flood would be what we call a paradise. Within the earth, as we have already noted, there would have existed thermonuclear mechanics to keep the atmosphere and the Earth's surface within an approximate range of 72 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. The Earth's crust was of granite composition from 6 to 16 miles thick, as it is today, with huge reservoirs of water retained underneath. Now, as to the specific causes of the flood, we refer to the Genesis record, Genesis 7, 10 to 12, which gives a clear scientific sequence. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, were all the foundations of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So here's a list of 3 things that happened in perfect order. Fountains of the deep were broken up. Windows of heaven opened, began to rain, and the rain lasted 40 days and 40 nights. Imagine the world as it was then, with a canopy about 11 miles above the earth, the solid shell of granite, the interior with great reservoirs of water, including huge pools of asphalt and oil in the original hydrocarbon pristine form, and radioisotopic elements perfectly balanced, with a hard core of iron-based material at the center of the earth. Psalm 46:6, nations are in an uproar, kingdoms fall, he lifts his voice and the earth melts. This states that God uttered his voice and the earth melted. This would have been similar to the atomic melting that occurred at Chernobyl in Russia, meltdown within the thermonuclear context. There was a resulting thermonuclear meltdown. God uttered his voice and the earth melted. With a simple statement, I have had enough, God could have brought judgment on the flood with his voice. The physical qualities of such voice enhancement probably brought a universal microwave reaction. That microwave energy traps the water molecules because the water molecule is approximately the same dimension as the vibration spectrum. The microwave energy traps the water molecules and heats them up. When water encased in the earth is heated to 250 degrees, that heat adds to pressure, more pressure adds to more heat adds to pressure, and so on, just revolving around. And in a matter of minutes, something has to give. In the computer model, it became evident that where the granite crust of the earth was thinner, eruptions would have begun, probably in the specific area. If you were to photograph at rapid shutter speed an egg rupturing under microwave energy, you would see it in the picture being torn apart at the seams. The egg would be blown apart in small pieces and larger pieces, as in the case with the earth, continents, and islands. Dr. Brown postulated from his computer model that the ripping apart of the earth at the seams before the flood would have occurred at 2.5 miles per second. He found that it would have taken only 8 minutes to rip the earth into continents. They would not have been separated this time, but simply ripped apart at the seams. Dr. Brown also found that the computer analysis revealed that when the earth ruptured, water would have been expunged in a narrow band of jet streams with such force it would have erupted 70 miles high. When the fountains of the deep were broken up, water streams heated to 250 degrees, that's Fahrenheit, or hotter. It was thrown up against the canopy, the ice canopy above, ripping holes and windows through it. And as the Genesis account describes, the windows of heaven were open. In the 600th year, in Genesis 7:11 of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the year, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. The voice of God surging through the earth at microspeed energy would have created ultraviolet vibrations, inducing thermonuclear reactions inside the earth. As a result of the water that was heated above the boiling point being thrown against the canopy of great pressure, the canopy was broken up. What is it comprised of? Water. The heated water moderated the temperatures in the upper atmosphere, and then the sun's rays began to filter through the broken seams of the canopy. Thus, for the next 40 days and 40 nights, the canopy melted and fell upon the earth in the form of rain. Due to the lines of force at the Earth's magnetic poles, the canopy would have fallen as ices and encased the great mammoths in their tracks. Therefore, we have a possible mechanism which caused the continents to be thrust upon themselves, resulting in great mountains, as well as tentative model for the conditions that brought upon the earth, the flood of Noah's day. So in summation, the voice of God uttered with extreme intensity disrupts the designed balance within the earth. That's Psalm 46:6. God uttered his voice and the earth melted. A literal thermonuclear meltdown ensues from the consequential imbalance. The violent release of energy causes the waters of the great deep to heat and rupture the granite crust of the earth. The force and velocity of the hot water breaks windows in the firmament. The firmament collapses into rain. Mountain upthrust is a natural succession of events as the violent natural forces of these waters thrust the continental granite shelves upon themselves. Dr. Morris states, why don't we find more human fossils? That's the question. Over 95% of all fossils are marine creatures, such as clams, corals, trilobites, mostly invertebrates with a hard outer surface. Of the remaining 5%, most are plants. Much fewer than 1% of all fossils are land animals. This encompasses reptiles, including dinosaurs, amphibians, mammals, birds, and humans. Land creatures have what we call a low fossilization potential. As land animals die in water, they bloat, float, and come apart. It's a very difficult thing to trap a bloated animal underwater in order for it to be buried. Furthermore, scavengers readily devour both flesh and bone. Seawater and bacterial action destroy everything. The scouring ability of underwater mud flows, common during the flood, would grind bone to powder. Conversely, what land fossils are found were mostly laid down during the Ice Age, a land-oriented event following the flood, which had the ability to bury animals in land-derived deposits. And by the way, there are human fossils in those sediments. So there are some. But the purpose of Noah's flood was to destroy the land communities, not preserve them, especially humans. Some creationists even postulate that the pre-flood continents were subducted down into the mantle, totally annihilating all remnants of the civilizations. In any scenario, what land fossils were preserved would be buried late in the flood, near the surface, and would have been subjected to erosion and destruction once again as the flood waters rushed off the rising continents. Furthermore, we mustn't overestimate the pre-flood population by considering the patriarchal lives and families as typical, for the earth was filled with violence. Genesis 6:13. Bloodshed would no doubt have terminated many family lines in both animals and humans. For purposes of discussion, let us assume 300 million people died in the flood, and that each was preserved as a fossil, evenly distributed in the sedimentary record, which consists of about 300 billion cubic miles. The chances of such a fossil intersecting the Earth's surface, being found by someone, and then being properly and honestly identified is vanishingly small. On the other side, if evolution is true, and that humans have lived on Earth for 3 million years, many trillions have lived and died. Where are their fossils? This is the more vexing question. We'll go to this next time.